And welcome back, fellow American patriots and Minutemen, standing at the ready to fight anew for the issues that matter today on this fine Wednesday, the 12th of August, here at Sierra Podcast. Your host, Daniel Horowitz, just recording a little early today ahead of our vacation. I will be out Thursday, Friday, and Monday, but fear not, we'll be back in full force next week. Here to focus on the issues that matter. And you know, the issue that shouldn't matter. The issue that shouldn't matter is Israel. You know why it shouldn't matter? Because in a sane world, they would be allowed and freed and independent, autonomous to deal with their security threats from Islamic jihad without us getting in their way. And therefore, we could focus on our problems here, including, by the way, the subversion and funding from Turkey and Qatar, funding Muslim Brotherhood mosques everywhere in America, including places like Texas becoming Islamic states. And then everyone would be happy. That's what should happen. And this is why, even since October 7th, I have barely focused on Israel because my focus is on the heartland of America, red states in particular, where I feel we could have the most ROI for what we do. And yet, there has been this relentless, coordinated effort to radicalize online elements of the right into the most degenerate left wing communist obsession about going to bat for not just any Islamists, but the most violent Islamists and attacking Israel every second. And then that's just transmogrified into Israel's responsible for everything. They're responsible for everything. It is needlessly distracting. It is needlessly dividing. And it's unnatural. Okay? You know, obviously, for much of the last two generations, Americans, and particularly American conservatives, recognize the divine providence of the Holocaust and then Israel's rise in its wake. They recognize the fulfillment of 1900 years worth of biblical prophecies coming to life. Wherever exactly you take it, it's hard to deny that there is something significant about that. But even without that, just strategically, well, yeah, we would back them over the Islamists no worse than we would back Taiwan over China to whatever degree. Some believe that the foreign aid was worth it, and you can make that case. Although I have argued in recent years that it just serves to hamstring Israel in an abusive relationship and creates excuses for others to bash Israel. But one thing that is not a conservative view is that somehow there is something unique or different about the Gaza or Judea and Samaria Arabs that are somehow less jihadist than the typical Islamist. And somehow we need to go to bat for them. And somehow we need to assert that Israel is responsible for every ill in the world, just like the left. It really makes no sense. So today I want to do something different as I go on vacation, a little bit dialed out of some of the news of the day. I wanted to bring on Dana Lash, who has not only been just locked in on this issue in the right way, but has actually taken a trip there. I haven't been there since my college days to see exactly what's going on there. So I wanted to get her on the ground report since she's returned. But first, before we get to Dana, I'm just waiting momentarily for her. Our sponsor today is our friends at Pocket Hose. You know, we might not have a political movement or party that's on target, but Pocket Hose is on target. It doesn't just have a great nozzle that shoots out almost like power washing pressure, but really it's the material, the Pocket Hose Ballistic, that's reinforced with liquid crystal polymer, the same material that's in bulletproof vests. So you don't get that kinking, it's horrible. Every year I've had the issues of trying to find the right hose, then it degrades. And by the way, this year with the drought, it would have been hell. having a conventional hose. You can now find it anywhere, but now for a limited time, with your first purchase of a pocket hose ballistic, you'll get a free 360-degree rotating pocket pivot, which also helps its versatility, and a free thumb drive nozzle that is really nice, is anti-rust as well. By texting CR to 64,000, that is CR to 64000. Well, with no further ado, I want to bring on Dana Lash, the host of the Dana Lash Show in Russia's old time slot, 12 to 3 p.m. Eastern. You have to follow her new Substack, Chapter and Verse Substack, where she has the reports from Israel and so much more. Hey, Dana, welcome back to The Blaze. It's been way too long. Thanks for joining me.
It's good to see you, my friend. Thank you so much. And I have more to come that I'll be putting up on Substack as well. We're just getting some video edited and getting all of that because there was so much to see. We went from the south to the north and everywhere in between. So it was fascinating.
So I could never have predicted this dynamic in a million years. If you would have taken me back 3 years ago, the right now there is more awareness than ever on the right. And I want to talk about the political right vis-a-vis your trip to Israel. The left, I think we all know this anti-colonial mentality, the globalists, why they hate Israel. It's been that way forever. But on the right, everyone seems to agree, with a few exceptions, like something that rhymes with Tucker, that Islam is incompatible with Western civilization. And they will all say that. But then somehow there is a certain percentage, but a growing percentage, that somehow when it comes to the Arabs and the Muslims living around Israel and attacking them, somehow there is something more virtuous about them than the ones in Nigeria, the ones in Kashmir, the ones in Burma, the ones, in parts of Russia, and in about 24 other conflicts throughout the world, where they're now adopting the leftist, communist, and pro-Islamist side. Where the hell is this coming from, in your opinion, before we get to your trip?
I would say it's propaganda. I think it's propaganda that is backed by Iranian and Russian and I would say Qatari Chinese cash. That's really ultimately what it is. And you make a really good point because, I was reading, I've been actually reading about the area of that particular area and looking at Gaza Strip specifically, and how you had Jordan and Egypt that were controlling, whether it's Judea and Samaria, and then controlling parts of Gaza Strip. And it was interesting how no one was objecting to who was controlling what then. It's so interesting, Daniel. There were no objections. There was nothing like an open air prison that was discussed. In fact, no one objected to it at all whatsoever until Israel, and then still objected to it even after Israel unilaterally withdrew in 2005 and gave everybody like a turnkey apartment. Like you walk in and your greenhouses are full. And I mean, it's pretty much like everything but the furniture in the houses. And then everyone now can see what Hamas, who was immediately elected in the year following, what happened since then. But I think it is all propaganda. And I think you're right to point out how the Islamist horrors against innocents in Africa and elsewhere are often widely ignored, even though for all the people that talk about genocide, looking at the Christians being killed in parts of Africa by whether it's, Al-Shabaab or whatever other Islamist terror group, that's actually genocide. There is nothing like that that's happening in Israel that I have seen or even have seen evidence of. So I think people need a dictionary. They need to stop buying into the propaganda, and they need to stop being desperate cable cast-offs who need clicks to survive.
So Dana, I know you're schooled in the history of this, unlike, I guess, this new generation that doesn't know anything, certainly didn't live through Israel's 50 million suicidal concessions, and then the intifadas that resulted as a result of that, and then them throwing out their own people, becoming the first nation in history to use its own army to take out its own people, hand it over to them, and they turn around within 24 hours and fire rockets in, and the rest is history. This history. The fact that these were not solid Muslim nation states that were around forever. That whole area was remade after World War I from the Ottoman Empire. Lebanon was earmarked for a Christian nation, Israel for a Jewish one. The rest Jordan, Egypt. These are all new countries that, had poor lines because you have all these ethnic conflict, were Muslim. And, the same thing that happened to Israel happened to Lebanon. Obviously, that Christians, it seems to be that post-Enlightenment, every religion seems to get along. You have the peace holding in Northern Ireland. I remember when I was a kid, that was the last religious conflict that we sort of had, Protestants and Catholics. Every permutation of religious strife has one religion to it. So again, I understand the left consistent with their ideology.
Right.
But Dana, I won't mention names, but I'm not just talking about people like Tucker. I'm talking about people that you and I would have considered allies until very recently. For many years, it's like
I have a smaller circle of allies than you do, I think.
Well, I don't need. Well, yeah, but I mean, but I'm
Even
just
back
saying,
then.
until 3 minutes ago, and then all of a sudden, it's not just that they go to the point. Look, we're bankrupt. Maybe this foreign aid thing is not good, but let's cut it off for everyone. Like, yeah, we give it to Egypt, Jordan,
I would
Saudi
actually
Arabia.
disagree with that.
But you know what I mean? But like,
Right.
you know what I'm saying? Like 1 or 2 tranches. No, they go the full communist left.
Yeah.
Because we know not everyone's getting paid off by Qatar. There clearly are some. How does this site? Is it like groupthink? Is it mass
I think there are some who
psychosis?
want to be. And I think they treat this like an audition. Like, look how well I can lap at the heels of Islamism. Look how well I can be a simp for Islamists. Look how well I can parrot the mullahs, the regime's talking points. Honestly, I feel like for some of these people, they act like it's a tryout. Maybe I'll get noticed by the people who read Tucker's feed, things like that. And then they think that they're going to get picked up. I mean, it wouldn't be the first instance of something of behavior like that taking place. But I think going back to what you said when you were discussing, people who change their position, even like a couple, maybe like a year ago or a couple of years ago, there are people that I always looked at as being, maybe we have the same end but different means. I am very careful as to who I consider an ally and who I consider not an ally. Just like I don't use the word friend very easily. I just say, oh, this is a coworker, or I'm sorry, you guys are friends. But this is like, an acquaintance, or this is a colleague, or this is my neighbor, because I think words have meaning and it's very important to establish that, especially when you're introducing those people. And with some of the people that we're talking about in the movement, I never looked at them as allies because there were things in the behavior that really stood out to me. Like even with Tucker, there were a lot of things that he would say that would harken back to like big government, compassionate conservatism policies that really laid the foundation for getting Barack Obama in 2008. And I would think to myself on certain, and I've talked about this on air and I've written about it before, where I'd think, well, that doesn't sound like a limited government policy. That sounds like big government. Or when I would hear people say, for instance, one of the big talking points a couple of years ago was, well, look at what they're doing in Hungary. They're incentivizing, which is a leftist way of saying paying for using taxpayer dollars. They're incentivizing people having larger families and having kids, but they never actually delved into how that program failed spectacularly and how they ended up spending more, putting themselves in the hole more. And then they actually went below what their birth rate was prior to ever implementing that plan in the first place. No one ever goes back to that because big government doesn't work. So I would see tells of this in certain reposts and articles and tweets, and sometimes just listening to, the talking heads on cable news or on air. And I started, I would hear a little bit of that. That is a leftist tendency that is manifesting in this expressed belief of big government policy. And that doesn't just stop at policy. There are other things that they share with the left, namely identity politics. And I think that that's how Israel and all of this stuff factors in there. There are people who really buy into identity politics. They have taken that bait from the left, but they think that it's more virtuous because they have an R after their name when they go and vote. But it's the same thing. Everyone talks about horseshoe theory, where you have these two opposite ends that are actually pretty much right close together because of the horseshoe shape. That's sort of where we are with these individuals. So I've never considered them conservatives. I've never considered Tucker a conservative. There are a number of people that I've never considered conservatives. Now I'll call them Republicans because they'll vote, Republican, and maybe they'll register with the party as Republicans, which is very different, Daniel, as you know, that from being a conservative. And so I think they have been made easier in these deficiencies of logic and belief and thinking so that now they're holding tighter to these behaviors more, and they feel like they have to, because they have to make a boogeyman out of someone on the right in order to assert the need for their viewpoints as running the right. So this is where we get into the whole populism thing. They confuse populism as a set of beliefs instead of a tactic, which is why you can have leftist populism and populism on the right. And too much is a bad thing. It's just a mental abortion if you have too much of it. So I see them promoting that as a talking point as well. So they're wanting to replace what they think is the platform of the party with what they want to be as the platform, which is more of that early aughts, 90s, quote unquote, compassionate conservatism, big kind of government moderation. And, that doesn't work well, clearly, because it was taken out to the curb by the Tea Party in 2012. So it has not worked well. I still don't think it works well, which is why they're not really able to score a lot of wins electorally.
So, Dana, knowing the history, knowing what you see here, what were you trying to seek and discover embarking on this journey? I haven't been there in like 20 years. It's been a long time. I'd like to go there. What were you seeking to discover before we
Mm.
get into your journey?
Oh, yeah. Well, obviously, biblical history. And
Yeah.
I don't know there's nowhere else
No.
on earth where you can go and see the things that I saw. And what's crazy is that there's like no velvet ropes. I was shocked when they were like, oh, here's the city of David. Go and walk on this like 3,000 some odd year old road. Go ahead. And you're walking on these stones that Jesus and the apostles walked on. You're walking on the road that went down to the pool of Siloam where Jesus healed the blind man. You are there in this. And what's spectacular about it is it's this union of, and that's where we get the Judeo-Christian term, which all of a sudden last week became like not a cool thing to talk about. But it's an idiotic opposition, because you're talking about the corpus of these works. You're talking about the Old and New Testament. Jesus said, I came to fulfill the old. He's not canceling it. He's not getting rid of it. And you're looking at places on earth, real places where history happened, where the Jewish faith and the Christian faith have like this common point on this map, this chronological order. And to have that shared history, it's one of the things the Trump administration recognized at the city of David when he instituted a plaque saying this absolutely is a site of American heritage, and followed by Argentina, followed by Guatemala. Other countries are doing the same. No velvet ropes. It could go and touch everything. Going into Old Town Jerusalem, you see the Stations of the Cross. You go into the Church of Holy Sepulchre. You can go right there to Golgotha, and you can touch it's just wild. And to be and see that biblical history, Daniel, that was number one.
And by the way, I would just say the book of Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings.
Yes.
That era, you're talking about almost 3,000 years ago to 2,700 years ago. You see, I don't know if you got a chance to go to Shiloh, the old temple there, the exact dimensions. Down to like the minutia of ritual purity, the way vessels were made, they've uncovered them. And again, it proves the veracity of the Bible.
We stood over an ongoing excavation where, just like I think a couple of months prior, they had excavated and they found actual, plural, clay seals from David's reign, like literally King David's kingdom, clay seals. And they were explaining how it was fascinating because they didn't always use wax. Sometimes they would use clay, and we're very glad for it, because when the Romans came in and were sacking everything and setting everything on fire, clay's hardened by the fire. So it actually preserved them. So you have concrete proof. This person existed. These things happen as the way that they were written. And it was amazing to be there. But, I also this is something that I have to say absolutely fascinated me. And I can say that I didn't go there necessarily with the purpose of seeing this, but I saw it, and it was incredibly illuminating. And I've traveled a lot around the world, and this was, I think, maybe the only country that I've ever been to that was very similar to the United States. It was very similar to the United States, not in that there were Western, obviously there are Western principles and the processes through which government's elected, et cetera. But the UK, obviously, but with Israel, I was in Jaffa, and I'm drinking this like strawberry lemon slushy, walking around looking at everything, perfect day. And it just struck me. I was walking down the street, and literally next door to each other was a mosque and a monastery. Two separate buildings separated by one path right next to each other. And I'm standing out there and I'm watching, people go into the monastery, and I'm watching people go into the mosque, and right next to each other at the port of Jaffa, where there's so much history has happened at this port. One of the oldest, I think maybe one of the oldest in the world, and so steeped in history. And it was amazing to see that there, because when you hear of all of these narratives about Israel, what you hear is, oh my gosh, you hear of apartheid and everything. Where was the apartheid happening? Because I didn't see any of that there. And there were so many different examples of this. We were in Nazareth, and obviously I had to go to Nazareth. I had to go to, where Jesus is raised. Jesus is, and where his Mary was from. And that's a Muslim majority town. And yet right in the middle of it, you have Church of the Annunciation, where Gabriel had announced to Mary that she was going to have a Christ child. And you're over again, there's so much history there.
It's a Muslim town, but it's controlled by Israel.
Yes.
As opposed to, I noticed you didn't mention another place that clearly you didn't visit.
That yet. Are you talking about Judea and Samaria,
or where? Bethlehem?
Oh no, I couldn't. So we were told that it probably wasn't in our best interest to go. And I make a point. The first person to tell me this was not an Israeli Jewish person. It was an Israeli Muslim.
Yep.
That told me
they get it.
It would not be smart for you to go there. And I'm like, why? I'm a Christian. I'm not Israeli. And they go, you're an American Christian. So I couldn't go to Bethlehem. And it's like, apparently it's a process, from what I am told, to actually do it. I did not get to go there and go see where my Savior was born, but because of the Palestinian Authority. But I could go everywhere else and touch everywhere else, like in Nazareth, a Muslim majority town that is the security is controlled by Israel. And I could go to Church of Annunciation, and I could see, Mary's parents' house. I could go into I could see everything, walk around, talk to some Bedouins. No issue at all whatsoever. We were in Judea and Samaria, and I wanted to go see the beauty of the area as well, because there's so much history there. And Judea and Samaria, and I'm also a very interesting tourist, because I like to do everything, and I don't necessarily like to do all of the stuff that everybody else does. And I'm like, well, there's Section A, and I saw this giant red sign, and it was told to me that, okay, well, that's a sign that Israel puts there because you're probably going to get beaten to death if you go past that. I'm not kidding you.
That's why they invented Waze. The Waze app was invented by the Israelis, because
to navigate around
20 years ago, you had issues. They would wind up in the wrong place.
Yes, and it's scary.
This is the fundamental difference. This is, how do you deal with a society? And this is not an Israeli problem. This is an us problem. You there in Texas, we're based in Texas. It's becoming like that. And they're docile until they reach a critical mass. And then it just explodes. It explodes on you, where they don't coexist with anyone. That's the problem. If they control it, if you're under their authority, you're screwed.
Yeah.
And I think this is the biggest thing that everyone's missing in this one-sided fight. And I'm curious if your travels, if you're able to sense some of this, because to me, Israel has been a victim of its own compassion for 50 years.
I completely agree.
That they faced, so they were always facing in tennis what would be called match point. Right, that if you couldn't afford to lose. If you lose, you're dead. And what we saw on October 7th, that's what would have happened in 67, 73, really 48 at the beginning as well. And what happened was, but they never returned the favor. They didn't even expel them. So what would happen is, every time they'd win, they'd sort of pull out, not really allow the Jews to build, even though they won it over. Arabs could do what they want. And then they use that to launch the next round and the next round. So then each time they come in, counterattack, but then the modality of Hamas or whoever else, Hezbollah, is to use civilians and the PR war and mix it together. That's their modality of warfare. Yes. And they know it works. So then it's like, what I tell everyone is, what the hell do you want them to do? Like, literally, what do you want them to do?
And there's another layer to add to this. So, obviously, I mentioned Hamas was elected, I think it was 06, 07, to run Gaza. And, you know, you had Fatah in Judea and Samaria with the Palestinian Authority. You had Hamas that was building popularity. Their popularity in Gaza is still record high. And I know people say, well, you can't trust it. Well, actually, you can. There are a number of ways to do it. I talked to Ambassador Mike Huckabee specifically about this when I was over there, and I saw him like the day before I ended up leaving Jerusalem. You absolutely can. And they have. They had municipal elections in Gaza literally just in April. And what they discovered, shockingly, that Hamas's popularity since October 7th has only increased in Judea and Samaria to the point where the Palestinian Authority, Daniel, they suspended elections a couple of years ago because they knew that they were going to lose, that Hamas has only grown in popularity, even in Judea and Samaria, what Westerners incorrectly call West Bank. So this is a major problem. So that's another layer to add on to this. And it's not all that different when, as you know, when you get into Lebanon, because Hezbollah, you're Hezbollah. I mean, there were stories of doctors and attorneys, people who looked normal. I'm going to say something that's a bit stereotypical. They did not look like, you know, the Team America terrorists. Yep. They looked like well-groomed attorneys in nicely tailored suits who end up going and wrapping the band around their head and putting on, you know, a shouldered fired, you know, a rocket launcher and going and fighting for Hezbollah. That is the difficulty in all of this. And the solution, as you're saying, is not easy.
Yeah, this is and again, like, especially on the right, as we watch McKinney, Texas, frankly, everywhere in Collin County, all over Texas, these Muslim Brotherhood mosques, they're funded by Qatar, they're funded by Turkey, prop up. It's like, what do you think you're going to deal with? I don't know if you've ever studied, were you in Hebron at all?
No, we were not. We were not.
I mean, obviously, you have the Cave of the Patriarchs, Matriarchs there, which, of course, the Muslims have to lay claim to everyone else's religious sites. That's another thing. They have to latch on to that. So in 1929, that was the seminal moment. You had a group of peaceful Jews that lived there forever, some Sephardic Jews as well. And they actually got along well with the local Arabs. Because remember, back then, in the wake of the Ottoman Empire, you had smatterings of Bedouins, different populations, but you didn't have a Muslim state. It was no man's land. But as soon as they feel agency, what happened in the 29 Hebron massacre, you had, and this was similar to October 7th, people that they employed, people that they were business partners with out of nowhere on a Saturday. That was funny. That was also a Saturday, come to think of it. In 1929, in the course of 90 minutes, they rampaged with hatchets and machetes, and they dismembered the very people that would go to their weddings. It was that intimate. They knew they were. So it's like you could live with them until you can't. So did you, from interviewing people, did you get a sense of both from Jews, Christians, Arabs, you know, what their sense was of this relationship? On the one hand, I think there is a positive trajectory on the, I guess you'd say, the pre-40 or pre-67 Israel, where it's not perfect, but the Muslims are starting to become more patriotic Israelis. Mm-hmm. And then everyone else, where it's like, there's nothing you can do. Like, what are you supposed to do with them?
Right. This was the thing, because I wrote about on Substack that there was one thing that challenged me, and this was the thing. And I'm still kind of wrapping my head about how to even like really address it, because that is, I keep going back to, you know, like Sodom and Gomorrah, like, but Lord, what if there's like one left? What if there's like one person who's, you know, not, that's what I keep going back to. And we talked to people who are at Channel 12. My husband traveled with me. We talked to people who are at Channel 12. We talked to different reporters who've gone to Gaza, who've been up in Lebanon. We talked to, you know, all kinds of folks. And we also talked to Israeli Muslims and, you know, the Bedouin community, which is, from what I had learned over there, is a strong ally. And, you know, they go in IDF, they do all of that. And the difficulty is, you know, we had the discussion about day workers. You know, how many of October 7th, how many of this
Yep.
came down to day
Yep.
workers? I mean, there was a friend of mine who was stabbed at a wedding by a day worker, by someone who came in from Gaza, who worked that day and stabbed him. And one of the problems is, I mean, Gaza needs money, even though they've been given tons of money, even by U.S. taxpayers inadvertently. And they've had aid given to them, which I know the Israeli government gets criticism for, but then they get criticism if they don't give them money for aid. So it's like, it's a catch-22 on purpose. So their economy is in shambles. The only way they can actually earn real money is if they come into Israel and work. And even with that dynamic, it's shocking to me that there are not more people that are livid over the fact that you have the elected body that's running that strip, just looking at the southern part of the problem, that's running that strip, that is jeopardizing the only way that some of these people can even buy food, and the only way that some of these people can make a living. And especially now after October 7th, to just completely make it almost, impossible to have that same level of the amount of day workers coming up, even that. And so it creates this massive problem, and I'm just trying to wrap my head around it. Like, how do you live with people who would even be supportive of blowing you up, despite the fact that they know the only way they can make a good living is by coming up there and working in Israeli businesses? And so all these people
Sinwar himself, the head of Hamas at the time,
got treated at an Israeli hospital for a brain tumor, and he went back to Gaza and took over Hamas, and then planned October 7th. I mean, there's so many of these stories, as you know, Daniel. There's so many of them.
The woman that tried to blow up Soroka Hospital in Beersheba, I'm sure you've heard of that. The woman from Gaza who was treated for burns there.
Yeah,
and then she was appointed. And then Trey, what's his name from Fox?
Trey,
Young, I apologize, I'm forgetting his last name, the Fox Israel correspondent. He interviewed her and asked if she would do it again, because she was caught, and then she was released as one of these 50 million, 1 for 1,000 hostage exchange deals. And she's like, sure, she would do it. That dogma, and this is what scares me about this fake political right in America. If they really believed in their base and we're going to save white Christian America from the Islamic hordes,
we're crusaders.
Yeah, you're. So why are you going to bat for the same ideology? See, right now, like, one of the things I want to do is make a law, state and federal, banning Qatar and Turkey from funding mosques in America. But every time we bring up Qatar, they're like, oh, Zionist, that's Israel propaganda. I'm like, well, I thought you cared about America first.
They're actual receipts. We know how much money they give to influence not just academics, but also lobbying government. We know because they have to, because of FAIR purposes, but also because colleges and universities have to know where they're getting these funds from. We know how much China gives. We know how much Russia has spent. I mean, there's a reason why we know these things called facts, because they're published, and you can use this tool called the internet to go and look it up. It's amazing.
So, okay, I got to get to your trip to the Gaza border, the massacre, the kibbutzes, the people, that whole thing, because I think what's important, the biggest thing I said in the week following October 7th, almost 3 years ago, was that, so this blood libel that's been going on for decades, they would have the world think that Israel is some sort of, like, everyone there is like me, religious fanatic, right-wing guy, now it's getting more right-wing than it used to be, more religious than it used to be. But in fact, so the people that were attacked, both at this, like, whatever they call it, the Nova Festival, they're I mean, very, 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 very left. It was actually on a Jewish holiday on Saturday, so no religious person was there. The kibbutzes around there were like old school socialists. Like, discuss what you discovered from them. Some of them would have NGOs to transport these guys for medical care and help them in Gaza, and they were mugged by reality.
Yep. And I think the mugged by reality, I've been hearing different versions of that from a lot of people since, October 7th. And I mean, I knew the history about the kibbutzim and how, how they were formed and how some are a little bit more lefty than others. And I actually think, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's only one that still kind of even sort of operates on those old school agrarian kind of lines, but everybody else is kind of, modernized. And then the Nova Festival, I mean, you had a bunch of people out basically dropping acid in the desert.
Oh yeah.
But they're going to a festival. It was like a Lollapalooza kind of thing for EDM. I mean, they're out, they're living their lives. They're not, they're not doing anything. And to go down there, it was actually stunning, first off, to see not just how close Gaza was, but also the required amount of land necessary to have a buffer.
Mm.
And learning everything in the lead up. There was a great book that I read, While Israel Slept, which is a phenomenal book that gets into everything about the lead up to October 7th and then as it was happening. And there's stuff in there that I'm pretty sure a lot of people in both our audiences have not heard. And going down there and seeing all of that and visiting also the bomb shelters and learning about some of the stories. There were so many different heroic stories that happened all that day, because there were 35 different sites. And that was the other thing that really stunned me. 35 different areas. It wasn't just one, and it wasn't just one part of the border fence. And then realizing the amount of the operation, the time, all of that. Like in Surat, we went to Surat, we ate there. We were at one of the outlook points. We went to one of the museums there. There's a lot of video footage, a lot of audio. And the video footage, I'll remind everybody that they always want to question it and say that it's false. It literally came from Hamas. It was literally taken off of jihadis' dead bodies, and then they uploaded it online, and it was downloaded from being online. So if they didn't make it back to Gaza and upload it,
on the victims' phones themselves, they would.
Yes, there was also those. Yes, because there was one bomb shelter in which there was one young. It was with the IDF. Last name was Shapira. He ended up. He and his roommate Hirsch, they ended up holing up in this bomb shelter, and they were taking the grenades that Hamas was throwing in there to try to get them out and throwing them back out at Hamas. And this was captured on one of the vehicle's cameras. I think it was one of the victims' cameras, and then Hamas had their footage. And then there was footage from the victims inside on their own devices. So being there and seeing that, your first question is, why in the hell would you live here? Knowing that you've got Gaza right there, and people would love to murder you and are raised to murder you. But then you think, well, and I go back to this Reagan quote, if not us, then who? Speaking for them, not for me. If not us, then who? If not now, then when? Like, you're going to give up your home and where you have raised your family and land that is yours because terrorists want to run you out. And then if you leave, who is left there to defend it? And that was a very interesting conversation with people who lived in Surat, with people who were near the rainforest, this side of the Nova Festival. And then also we were all the way up north in Metula, which was a little nerve-wracking because Metula is surrounded pretty much 75% by Lebanon. Oh, wow. And it is up there like it's like a comma or it's an apostrophe that juts into the north. And then Metula is right there, surrounded entirely by Lebanon, except for the southern part. And there were houses with Israeli flags in the back, and you could see giant fencing with dollops of razor wire, and that's the international border. And then there's Lebanon. And then in the distance, you could see a destroyed village, which was a terror tunnel village, where people willingly just gave up their property and went somewhere else and let Hamas basically use it to hide munitions and et cetera, et cetera. And I'm looking at this beautiful town, very old town, looking at this beautiful town, like how could you? But then, I look at the United States. I'm like, if we had this problem with Mexico, I'd probably have a cannon or two.
Okay, that bothers me right there. This is what, again, we're talking about the supposed conservatives. I'm like, if you have a Jewish exception to self-defense in Islam that you claim to dislike, then fine. But don't give this gay argument, this left-wing loser argument that, we have to have that proportionality in this nonsense. They have to have their entire north evacuated for a year, and it's a country the size of New Jersey.
2 years.
So it's like, what the hell are you doing? Like, okay, you want to piss on them, fine, but I don't want to sit and promulgate this unjust law of warfare that if we had this problem in the Mexican border, I'm sorry, but the buffer needs to be on that side, not our side of it.
Exactly.
It's just very bizarre that you have large swaths of the right now, again, promulgating these left-wing arguments when everything they did until now that could have made peace, they tried. And in fact, I would argue that's why they were in a precarious situation, because they, every time a Jew is kicked out of land, they're done, right? You're not allowed to live there. You can't live there. You'll get killed. Whereas, you have 1.5 million Arabs in pre-67 Israel, And then you have those areas in Judea, Samaria, even the areas where Israel maintains control, plenty of Arab settlements and illegal settlements.
And do the math real quick too, Daniel. I mean, per capita, if you look at the deaths from October 7th in Israel, and you tried to Americanize that and adjust it per capita, you're looking at 40,000 fatalities. How do you think the Trump administration would respond if cartels to the south of the border decided to take out 40,000 Americans?
Well, I would hope, even if the cartels would respond with a modality of warfare of hiding behind civilians and then broadcasting that for sympathy, that we wouldn't fall for it. I would hope we wouldn't fall for it. But that's what's happening there. And like, there's another thing, again, sensing the culture when you went around, and if you could just give some anecdotes for this, I was wondering if there's some deep down jealousy that, you have all these G.I. Joe fake cosplay people in America on the right, like, we're going to fight for Christian nationalism, we're going to fight for the country, but they wouldn't miss buffet night to fight for their views, in fact, whereas they're like, it's real, and you have the, men that have been on 3 years of reserve duty, nonstop, people like 40 years old, people in their 40s, my age, with kids, they actually fight for it. And, again, it's not perfect. As a conservative, as a religious Jew, there's still ground to be made there. Yeah. But the trajectory, it's gotten more religious. Birth rate is the trajectory is better than in any Western country. They serve in the military. It's like, isn't that what the right here claims they want? They're fighting Islam, I
mean, there's the things that they do, and then the things that they say and the things that they do, which are, sometimes completely opposite one to the other. And I agree with you. I think there are a lot of people that, I don't know why they talk very tough online, and they think that talking online is, I guess, the extent of the effort. And that is such a, I don't like to use the word privilege, an indulged viewpoint, for the lack of a better way to put it. It's such an indulgement. It's such an indulging viewpoint. But that is true. I mean, there were people that, one of the guys that we talked to over there, he is in the reserves, and his son is in, active duty IDF. When we were up near Metula, going up north, we stopped in a hummus restaurant, which, okay, brand new thing for me. I didn't even know that there were whole restaurants that were just hummus restaurants and you had different toppings. I didn't know this. It's the best hummus ever. But I'm like, I did not even know this existed. Anyway, sitting there and eating great food, and IDF walks in, and they've just been up north, and you could tell they had dust all over their firearms, and they had dust all over their uniforms and in their hair. And you could tell that they had literally been out in it, and they're just rolling in, and they're just getting some hummus and some sodas, and that's it. And then they're going back to do their thing. And it was very casual. But everybody there does something. I'm not arguing for like a draft or forced military service in the United States, but I'm telling you, if we had a stronger fabric as a society, we wouldn't have to force anyone. If we were raising people the way they ought to be raised, and we were actually doing our godly duty and going to church instead of screaming Christ is king like some blasphemous cudgel, we wouldn't have to do that, because we would have the inclination and the volunteer spirit to do it ourselves. And so that is what they're missing. That is what they lack. And that's more important than anything that they could say that doesn't match their actions online.
I know you got to run in a minute. Is there anything else you feel us Americans can learn from what you saw going on there in Israel?
Honestly, I don't know how to put this. We're very proud in the United States. If somebody attacks me and my neighbor or an ally of mine said, don't respond, you would not be my neighbor or ally anymore. If you told me that I could not defend my family, if you told me that I could not use any of the thousands of guns that I have in my possession to defend myself, you would not be my friend. You would not be my ally. I would not have anything else to do with you. I would go Han Solo it. I realize this is all about a plan to continue existing. And I don't necessarily, and I realize that we have like this, I think Gad Sad calls it suicidal empathy. I think that the world is trying to put a lot of pressure on Israel as, to be suicidally accommodating. Allies don't ask other allies to be suicidally accommodating. No, I would not ask my friend that. I would not ask a family member that. I'm not going to ask my only ally in the Middle East to do the same, especially when we know the history of who started what and when. And this is not us giving them anything, not us sending boots on the ground, not us doing anything but sending them what, $3 billion in an FMF, in which we get back more in R&D than we actually send out. That's one of the reasons why our F-35s are so great. One of the reasons why we have, the visuals that we have with helmet displays. I could go on and on. And we end up owning that IP. So we're not even giving them really anything. And yet we're saying, oh, well, don't do. So I think that, ultimately allowing them to do what they need to do and what they do really well is one of the best things that you can do for an ally that doesn't require anything else on your part than to grow bigger balls. And that's it.
Well, yeah, that is a big lesson to take away. Anyway, I know you got to run chapter and verse Substack. I really like that you're writing there now. And obviously, everyone knows where to find the Dana Lash Show, 12 to 3
Yep.
p.m. Eastern Time. Take care. We'll see you later.
Thank you, Dana. Appreciate it.
Take care. So again, Dana Lash there. And yeah, I mean, she's right about that. I would just say, I just don't see a scenario where we leave them alone with this aid, which is why I feel it's just better, and the Israeli government feels that way as well, to just ease off of it and phase it out and let them be on their own. But again, the biggest thing that bothers me is that by spending so much bandwidth on the right now debating this, it's distracting and also undermining our ability to deal with Islam here. Meaning, if we're now forced, because what they're basically saying is you need to be anti-Israel on this new right. So in order to do that, you mollycoddle Qatar. So then they're not going to go after Qatar. See, I'm fine. You want to say we don't want to give Israel aid. I'm not even so hot to trot about them. Fine. But don't allow your hatred for Israel or apathy to them to then spill over and kiss Qatar's rear end and allow them to continue funding mosques in America just to own the Jews. It's sort of how, like, a lot of the Poles during, the 1939 Hitler invasion, they're like, hey, yeah, we'll allow ourselves to be destroyed because we hate the Jews. I mean, it's just so stupid, because one of the things Dana was saying is, like, Muslims are doing fine in Israel. The ones that are actually in, at least pre-67 Israel, they clearly built a certain culture around it. While imperfect, the Muslims know, most of them, how to live as a citizen there and not screw with them. We don't have that dynamic here. Right? I'm not worried about them there. I'm worried about Islam here. Now, we're trying to hamstring them there. But, I believe in Deuteronomy 11:12, that Israel is a land which the Lord cares for. The eyes of the Lord are always upon it from the beginning of the year until the end of the year. God's going to have his vision, come to fruition there. That's going to play out. Okay, we saw that. God returned 7 million Jews, probably more than there was there during, the temple 2,000 years prior, after years of being kicked out. That clearly, and all of the biblical prophecies, and God will return the captives of Judea everywhere. It says that, that's something to celebrate. If you don't care to celebrate, fine, then be indifferent. But to me, it doesn't surprise me why our enemies are trying to peel off the American right to become like the left, to piss on Israel, because then that paralyzes us from dealing with Islam. When I say dealing, I don't mean getting involved in Middle Eastern wars. And I don't know if Dana agrees with me. I mean, I oppose the Iran war just because I rightfully saw that Trump wouldn't prosecute it properly, and we just didn't have the economy for it. But what I mean is, for the mosques here, we don't have a security apparatus and a culture and a country that was built on what Israel was built. So what you have now is what we're the equivalent of right now is not Israel 2026. It's pre-Israel Jewish settlement 1929 in Hebron. And if you don't know that history, look it up, where, they're living as your neighbors and, often seem innocuous. And then one day they're jihadis, they're leaders, back then it was the Grand Mufti al-Husseini gets up there and said, they're taking over Al-Aqsa. And then within 48 hours, a guy that was your neighbor that went to your daughter's wedding will come and literally castrate you and dismember your body and rape your wife in front of you. That's literally what happened in Hebron in 1929. That's what these guys do. When you look at Hebron 1929 and you look at October 7th, never forget that that's not an Israel issue. It's much more our issue headed forward. If you look in your crystal ball, as Islam gets more and more aggressive. Right now, we're at the political jihad stage and then individualized attacks that we see all the time. But at some point, that's going to rise up into neighborhood by neighborhood, more of a ubiquitous physical massacre. And then we would have spent the years preceding it going to bat for them just to own the Jews. It's just strategically stupid, and particularly for those who say and agree and assert that Islam is incompatible with America, with Western civilization. What? So somehow they're compatible with Israel and Israel has to, kiss their ass? This whole thing is a freaking blood libel. And again, the other big thing is the fact that the victims were literally leftists, that were many of them, some of the people that were taken hostage were involved in NGOs to undermine the Israeli military and kiss up to the Arabs. A lot of them did charitable work for them, and they literally used, some of them, Hamas recruited the workers that worked at them because they felt the need, they literally felt the need to give them jobs, to know exactly where the safe rooms were, where they'd be hiding out. That's what Islam is. And this is the important thing, that video I played from that Iranian Christian yesterday, if you remember the show, from McKinney, Texas, talking about that mosque there. How when their numbers are smaller and they don't have agency to overpower you, they'll lie to you. They'll butter you up. They'll even act friendly. Again, it's a fascinating history, the arc of the Hebron Massacre 1929 and October 7, 2023, not just for Israeli history and for Jews, but for America and everyone in the West that now has Islam in their communities, that they wait until they have agency. One of the things in Hebron, the British took away everyone's guns. There was I think one pistol in the entire Jewish neighborhood there. That was it. And, the British completely sided with the Arabs then, obviously. And there were, I want to say, 15 or so paramilitary fighters. The prelude to the IDF was called Haganah. And they actually went into Hebron maybe 24, 48 hours before, when things were looking like they were cooking up a jihad, willing to help. And the people actually said, we don't want you. We're at peace with our neighbors. They would never do anything to us. And tragically, I mean, it was one of the most gruesome things ever done in humanity. And that was a seminal moment because it applies today. We have about 4.5, 5 million Muslims in America. There is a very large percentage that when the call comes that now is time for jihad, they would take up that call. So again, my thing is, we don't need to mollycoddle Israel, talk about it all day, emote for them, even foreign aid. But the key is, leave them the hell alone. and go after the Islamic subversion in America. Obviously, it starts with cutting off immigration from there. But again, even if we never had a single new immigrant from these countries, just in terms of what's already there is an insane, insane problem. And it's intractable. And the first thing you can do is just simply say we cannot have terrorist supporting countries and organizations supporting religion in this country, supporting large swaths of land that are rezoned in town councils. I'm just telling you, if you're in Texas, around some of these areas in Collin County, I'm just giving one of many, many places that they've colonized. I'm not here to scare you. I'm just telling you, think about those kibbutzes on the Gaza envelope. It's the same thing. Don't think it's any different. Don't think it's any different, buddy. You know, the notion that Islam's concern is with Jews is absurd. Okay, what are the 15, 17 million Jews in the world? It's the Christian world that they want to go after. That's obviously much, much larger. That's what they're here to dominate. We're all in the same boat. It's like this notion of, oh, I'm going to dig a hole under your part of the boat and not my part. It's just dumb. Again, this doesn't get into the Iran war and the stupid things Trump did and the stupid decisions. But the notion that you're going to side with that and spew the Gaza genocide, which is just so degenerate and immoral and wrong and reverberates in terms of what we're going to have to deal with. Give me a freaking break. But anyway, that's about it. I know I didn't get to the news of the day on my way out to vacation. You could still email me, Daniel Horowitz at startmail.com. Make sure you like and subscribe. Give us a 5-star rating on iTunes. I will be back next Tuesday. Make sure to mark that on the calendar. Till then, Micah 6:8, Deuteronomy 11:12.